Alright, so I wanted to talk a little bit today about blood magic. You noticed I put up the video gosh, it was about a week ago that I put the Minder's Reaper video where I was using blood magic as a support build. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why you don't see blood magic much and why, while the whole concept of a support necro is kind of fun to play with, it doesn't actually work as a meta build. And I'm also going to talk a little bit is why blood magic also doesn't work as a non-support, why it doesn't work as an offensive setup. I'll start by talking about blood magic as a support trait line, since it's obviously the necro's support trait line. So it provides support in two ways. So we've got a little bit of regen, which is fine. We've got res support, that's obvious on transfusion and ritual of life. And then you can provide siphons, or you can provide AoE healing. And of course there's other ways you can provide support using other methods, Plague Signet and Unholy Martyr for pulling conditions and such, shout build with shout runes that can provide support, but for the purposes of this video I'm just going to talk about just the support provided by blood magic. And the first problem with blood magic is the most useful thing that blood magic does as far as support is concerned is rezzing capabilities, and it's got two major traits for this: transfusion, ritual of life, and it's also worth noting that life from death does heal downs. Now, it's a little awkward in that necromancer skills, as a rule, do not scale well with healing power at all. The exception being transfusion and life from death. And of course, if you're using something like, say, Rune of the Flock, that'll scale with healing power, and your regen will scale with healing power, and that was kind of the basis of the Minder's Reaper video that I showed. But going back to the healing power, is since we don't have a lot that scales with it, you get stuck with this awkward problem where in order to bring out the best parts of blood magic support, you have to take a lot of healing power. But that healing power doesn't help the rest of your healing capabilities outside of those supports. For example, transfusion is an amazing healing skill. Like with the Minder setup that I was running, I was getting 10k transfusions on people. That's a ton of healing. But that's healing that's only up with a Soul Reaping build every 25 seconds. And if you're not running Soul Reaping, well, it's almost never up. Also, since on a Reaper build, Soul Spiral is a huge part of your damage, you're basically stuck with this awkward problem where you do damage or you heal people, you don't do both. It's also part of, and of course Soul Spiral is also part of your down cleave, so you've got this problem where you've got so many things you need to be doing with that skill, you never can just hold it just for the transfusion, which hurts it as a rezzing skill, and also hurts it as an offensive skill, because if you use it to heal, well then you can't use it for offense. If you use it for offense, you can't use it to heal. And while, yeah, you're probably saying, well, it's a support necro, you're supposed to be healing, not doing offense. This is PvP. You can't just have a pure support. Even full support Ellies spend a lot of their time doing arrow overloads, cleaving, stunning people at clutch moments, etc., etc. And then, but just going back to the resin capabilities, so just looking as the spec has the power res spec, it still fails. Just on that capability alone, has a resin spec, it fails. Because you're a necromancer. Chances are, the person that's going to be needing resin first is you. And you can't power res yourself. That's the big issue, and you kind of noticed that in some of the videos where I really, even though I was running in the Minder's Reaper video a very res-heavy build, I didn't get many reses off. And even when I was playing with it with matches that I haven't uploaded, it just wasn't something you could do a lot. The other problem you run into is while there's a ton of resing capabilities in terms of heals to downs in these two traits, it's not a protected res. You don't get damage reduction for yourself, you don't get extra stability, You don't get any kind of blocks or anything. So you've only got your native resing capabilities, and cleaving out a necro res is very easy. Because at best, you're going to have the 3 stacks of stability from infusing terror when you do a transfusion. That's probably what you can have. Yeah, you might have some more if you pop chill to the bone before doing it. But that's it. That's all you get. So 1 grav well plus any other interrupt, and that res is gone. And moreover, since it's an unprotected res, they can just spike you. And you might say, well, transfusion's a teleport, so you do it from far away, and yeah, you could do that. But the chances are, in the vast majority of times where you need to be getting that res, you're not going to be in a position where you can teleport them to a safe spot. Now, there are fortunate cases, like particularly in Kylo, where you might be on the far side of building and you can teleport them through the building and the enemy has to waste time finding you again. But other than circumstances where you just happen to be in just the right spot right when that person needs that res, that teleport's not that useful. Especially since it's only a 600 range teleport. So if you're on, say, a flat ground fight, so say a faux fire mid-fight, teleporting someone 600 units on flat ground, that's meaningless. It takes a melee a couple seconds, not even a couple seconds, maybe 1 second to cover that distance, and if they've got any kind of leap or teleport, they'll be right on you the moment you teleport them. The teleport doesn't do that much. And the actual revival speed of transfusion, at 2% per pulse, there's 12 pulses on Soul Spiral, 9 on Core Shroud. You're not resing all that much faster than a standard res. Now, if you're resing multiple people, that could be exciting. Of course, since you're also, if you've got multiple downs that you all just teleported to your location with transfusion, you just made cleaving out all those downs really easy for the enemy since you just consolidated all the things they need to cleave. This trait, if you're running a lot of healing power, this trait can get a little exciting. Because it goes up to 2k with a Minder's Amulet. And you know, getting 2k healing every time you drop out of the Shroud, that can be exciting. It's not as big as you think. Now it can be a little interesting if you get cleaved out of your Shroud res, because it'll automatically heal the down for 5%. So if you're resing someone in Shroud, and they cleave you out of Shroud, boom, there's another 5% res the moment you get cleaved out. But unless that down is at 95% down health, that's probably not going to matter, because once you've been cleaved out of Shroud, you can't really stay there and keep resing. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can get away with unshrouded reses, but most of the times you can't. Which also, since you can't really get away with unshrouded reses most of the times, the summoning Lesser Well of Blood isn't all that exciting as a res trait. It doesn't really help you, the Necro. It can be very beneficial to allies if you're doing a power res with other members of your team. But again, that's a very situational use. And that's kind of the problem. And all of these things together, so the problems with transfusion, ritual life, and the fact necromancers are probably the person that's going to need to be resed anyways, leads to the problem of necromancers just aren't that good of a power res. Even though this entire spec basically reads power res spec, you're not that good compared to other options. You're still better than, you know, just a typical DPS build at resing. But compared to other resing options, say Elixir res, a Distortion res from a Mesmer, a Stealth res from a Thief, a Stealth res from a Ranger, you're going to be worse than all of those. Any kind of an Invul res or a Sanctuary res on a Guardian, anything that offers hard protection to the res will be infinitely better than anything offered by Blood Magic. And of course, once you get rid of the res capabilities of Blood Magic, it doesn't offer much in team support. I mean, I guess if you're taking wells, you can offer protection. But you're going to need a lot of boon duration to make that protection worth anything, and that's not something really available in PvP. Yeah, you can put on a Diviner's Amulet and get a crazy amount of protection duration, but there's other easier ways to get protection, and that don't involve glassing a Necromancer to do it. Because if you're doing that, if you're running a Diviner's Wells build, so you're running the 10-second protection build, you've sacrificed everything just to do one thing. When you could just get something like a support ally that can provide permanent protection without having to glass out and devote their entire build to doing it. Not to mention there's the whole problem of their wells, which means they're placeable AoEs, and yeah, it provides protection the moment the wells goes down, so you can just spot it on someone. There's not any other support value to wells. I mean, yeah, if you're using the healing well, you can get a little bit of healing, and if you're using Well of Power, you can get some boons on them and cleanse some condies, but that's not a huge amount of support. Like, Wells is a support tool, even the blind support from Well, it just doesn't work. If they were way bigger, it would have more value. In fact, honestly, I would rather this trait just make your Wells bigger than give protection. The last thing I'm going to touch on has a support spec. Actually, there's two things I'm going to touch on. First off, Unholy Martyr. This is an altruistic trait. It's absolutely terrible. First off, having two altruistic traits in the same tier is bad because invariably one of them is going to be better than the other one. And that's exactly what happens here. You never use Unholy Martyr. You always use Transfusion. And even ignoring the fact that Unholy Martyr competes with Transfusion, this skill is stupid dangerous to you as a Necromancer. This skill, this trait, will get you killed in PvP. Because you are pulling conditions on you. You've got all of the same drawbacks that Plague Signet has, but it doesn't have the decency of at least giving you the ability to weaponize all that risk that you're taking. Yes, it gives you 7% life force. So yeah, if you pull a bleed or a few stacks of Vol, then yeah, it might be fine. If you pull a stack of burns, you're dead. Or at least you're going to lose all of your shroud. If you pull an immob at the wrong time, you're dead. If you pull a chill at the wrong time, you're dead. And of course, it's only doing this in Shroud, and you don't have native cleansing in Shroud. I guess you could pick up Death Magic and be pulsing one cleanse every 3 seconds, so you could nullify it that way, assuming you're not under other Condi pressure, which you are entirely likely to be under. Since you are a Necromancer, you are going to get tunneled a lot. The skill, it just doesn't do much. You're cleansing one condition off one ally every 3 seconds, and in return you're taking a massive risk. It's just not worth it. It's too dangerous. And Transfusion's just straight better. The other and final thing I'm going to touch on, how does Blood Magic use as support, is our weapons. We don't have a support weapon, and we don't have a support shroud. And really, we don't even have all that much in the way of support utilities, either. Closest thing we've got support on our weapons is Staff 2 provides regen. And Focus 4 provides regen. And that's it. That's your support. That's terrible. We don't have any weapons that synergize unless you count Boon Corrupt support, but that's not something you spec into Blood Magic for. And because of that, you're leaning completely on the Blood Magic traits for your team support. And as I've already ranted about for the past several minutes, that doesn't cut it. So to sum it up, Blood Magic's bad because it's mostly res support, which doesn't work because chances are the person needing res is going to be you, the Necro, and even if it's not, this kind of res support isn't just, you know, resing traits, not res protection. Doesn't work well in PvP, because you need protection for your res in PvP more than you need resing speed. And, moreover, it doesn't work as a healing skill, because it's too situational. You don't have constant healing. And then you don't have weapons, and then some of the things, such as Unholy Martyr, are just dangerous to you. It just doesn't work. And of course, the other things, such as bad healing power scaling. I wish we'd have at least one healing skill that scaled well with healing power. Now, enough about support. Let's talk about it as an offensive spec. Or not just an offensive spec, has general use. And by general use, you're going to be linchpinned in an offensive because, I'm sorry, but these life leeches don't add much as sustain, so it's not really a sustain spec. And if you're not going for team support, the only thing left is damage. I mean, it's not providing mobility or anything, so you're going to be using it for some offensive purpose if you're not using it for support. So let's look at what it provides for offense. Well, we've got 2 stacks of bleed from Mark of Blood. We have a dagger trait. We have this altruistic trait, which isn't useful for offense, and we've got this trait. And we can have AoE life leeches to our team and ourselves, along with life leeches for ourselves. We have a Warhorn trait. This doesn't really help us at all in terms of offense. It does help us a little bit in terms of self-sustain, but again, since none of our heals scale with healing power, it's just not that exciting. And then there's the Grandmaster tier, which has 2 altruistic traits and the Wells trait. So you better be running Wells if you're running an offensive blood magic. Because otherwise you're just stuck, I guess, taking transfusion, because that's about the only thing else you take if you're not running Wells. But of course, if you don't have healing power, that's not all that exciting other than just being a down teleport. Which can be useful for saving someone from a stomp, but again, I already lectured on the problems with transfusion. Now, there is potential for this spec as an offensive. In fact, the most potential of all is this trait right here. Lesser Sig of Amperes. Now, it's a Signet proc. It provides life leeching, which is okay by itself. I mean, it's a adept. It's not, you don't really get exciting traits in this tier. But what could make this trait so interesting is this lovely trait over in Spite. Signets of Suffering, Signets Corrupt Boons, and Grant Might. Now, this is exciting for a power build. Because first off, you've got your Corrupts, which, you know, if you're doing PvP, that's something you need. So there's a Corruption source. You've now got passive Corrupt. And of course it generates Might, which is good for Blighter's Boon. But here's the problem. The proc requirements on Blood Bond is 4 stacks of bleed. Which means you need to be running a Condi build in order to use this trait effectively. Now, you could kind of set it off on a power build if you're running Staff, because you could put down Mark number 2, Mark of Blood, with Staff, and then dodge roll into it to set off this trait, and that could get you 4 stacks. But that 1 requires using Staff, which isn't exciting for a power build. And 2, you're blowing 2 things to set off 1 trait. That's assuming it doesn't get cleansed anywhere in that combo you just did. And that's kind of the problem. It's not that you can't do it, it's that you can't do it reliably, or you have to jump through hoops to set it off, which means you're usually dependent on having a Condi build working with you. Which is never good, because Necromancers, we're already dependent on working with supports, unless we just want to play with a handicap. And adding on having to play with a Condi build is something else we need for an effective that just kills the build, as far as power. Now, as Condi, this could be exciting as Condi. You know, it's another source of Boon Corrupt. But there's no synergy with this trait line in Condi, because to make that work as a Corrupt skill, you need to have Spite. So you're blowing 2 trait lines, and you haven't even picked up curses yet. Now you could run this. In fact, there was actually a Condi build prior, I think it was prior to Procmancer before the Corruption patch, that actually did exactly that. Spite, Blood Magic, Reaper, using Blood Bond. It doesn't really work though. It was worked at that time because in tournament play, because they had huge support, and that was back when they were obsessed with Signets as a corruption source. But it's just not a good option. It doesn't work in this meta. It probably will never really work again. The life force isn't there, the damage isn't there, you're not picking up curses. You don't have the weakness application, because again, you're not picking up curses. It just doesn't work. Neither the DPS nor the utility is there. Which means Blood Magic is pretty much going to be linchpinned for the foreseeable future. Has a power trait line. And has a power trait line, Blood Bond doesn't work. Because it's just too hard to set off. It's not reliable. Which totally kills the whole concept of this trait has a corruption source. And if you're not using this corruption source, it's not that exciting. Like, you get some life leeches. Okay. I mean, I guess they're pretty good life leeches. 300 damage, 500 heal. That's decent. But if you're going to ever take this trait in PvP, it's going to be with Sickness of Suffering. It's going to be in a power build, but you can't do that. And that's a shame. Because I would love to run a build that looks exactly like this. This would be a great power build. Boom. You're generating life force when this goes off. You're generating life force on your traits. Or your utility signets. Which means you don't necessarily need soul magic. This would be so much better than my Spite Curses Reaper build that I've already previewed in other videos and used in all of, or most of my Daily Necromancer videos. I would love to run this over Spite Curses. But I can't. Because this trait doesn't work. And that ticks me off so much. Now, okay, ignoring that trait, let's talk about the other two traits. If you're running a dagger, okay, fine. Quickening Thirst, there you go. There's your power setup for a dagger build. But you're not, let's say you're not running a dagger, which is going to be most power necros and all Condi necros. Well, I guess they could be running offhand dagger. It's still not exciting. Dagger is not exciting. It has gotten buffs recently. I know of one ArenaNet employee that actually plays Dagger Necro all the time with blood magic, and he does very well for himself. But it's not something that's going to be meta. It's not something you're going to see in tournament. You're not really going to work for solo play, and there's just better options available. Which means you're kind of linchpinned in the Ritual of Life, which isn't even an offensive trait. And I mean, you will occasionally res people, has a DPS Necro. That's important, so this isn't bad, but it's not ideal to not have a good all-round offensive trait. Cough, please fix Blood Bond. Now moving on, Vampiric, this is fine, you know, a little bit extra damage, you got some life leech, okay, pretty good. Oh shoot, one thing I wanted to talk about on Blood Bond. They don't necessarily have to change the proc requirements to make this work for a power build. What they just need to do is lower it. I kind of understand why they did bleed stacks for Blood Bond. You know, this is the blood magic trait line, and this is the vampiric signet. You know, vampires, blood, duh, obvious. So they're using it for thematic reason. That's the only real reason I can understand why they did proc requirements like this. You could still, keeping the bleeding theme, make this work for power build. Just lower the stack requirement to 2, because then you can set it off with this trait. And that would actually be really interesting to play with. Because since this trait is deterministic, it's when you dodge, that's something that's deterministically controlled, you could make a power build around doing dodge roll corrupt combos. And that would be really exciting to play with. Because I, as a player, I love anything that lets me use a passive trait actively. Like one of the reasons I love Spiteful Spirit so much. It's deterministic entering Shroud, so you can use Shroud Enter as an active skill to attack someone with that instant peck damage from Spiteful Spirit. That adds so much to the gameplay. It feels satisfying to use. It's good. It's not one of those. It's not like Chill of Death, where it's this passive thing that you don't really think about. It's something you can use all the time. And having Lesser Siggy of Vamp with Signet of Suffering be set off at 2 stacks and thus allow you to use Mark of Blood from your dodge roll as a proc, that would be great to play with. I would love to see that kind of gameplay. Just lower the stack requirement. And if you can't do that, then just change it completely to on crit or something. Okay, now I'm finally going to stop talking about Blood Bond and actually move on now. Already covered Vampiric, fine, great. Great minor trait, whatever, sure. This trait line, the Warhorn trait, usually what you'll see is Vampiric Presence. It's a little extra damage, a little extra self-support, a little bit extra damage to your team and self-support to your team too, so it's pretty good. It's a good all-rounder trait. This trait's actually pretty good. The Warhorn trait, obviously most PvP builds supports, regardless of Condi or Power, will have a Warhorn. And while you, again, usually see Vamp presence, it's not bad. 20% recharge on skills that you use frequently is pretty good. The duration isn't all that exciting. I mean, yeah, having a little more Locust Form can be good. It can also be bad if the enemy's using a lot of Shocking Auroras. Whale of Doom duration, Whale of Doom, it's already 3 seconds. Or, sorry, it's already 2 seconds. That's usually, in a PvP situation, enough to get whatever you need to get done during that stun. You don't really need the extra 1 second on it. But it's there. It's useful. Just the 20% duration is strong. It is competitive with Vampiric Presence. It's just most people probably prefer the extra damage for them and their team, so that's why you usually see Vamp Presence. Obviously, you're not going to use this on an offensive build. This Miner, not great for an offensive build. I already covered that. Grandmaster, again, as I mentioned earlier, having 2 altruistic traits in this Grandmaster tier. It's not good, both for support builds and for damage builds. Because again, what do I take if I'm running a damage build? Well, the only option is the Wells trait. But what if I don't like Wells? Well, then I got nothing. I guess you have to take Transfusion. I think I'm repeating myself. I think I mentioned this earlier in the video. Oh well. I think I was talking about the Grandmaster 2 already in this video. But what I would like to see done is I would like to see Unholy Martyr thrown out the window. As I already mentioned earlier, it's not good. It's suicidal. There's no situations where you'd actually want to have this thing. And replace this with some sort of generic offensive trait that's not tied to a specific weapon or utility set. I don't care exactly what it does. I don't have any grand suspicions for a new trait for this. Just something that's a general purpose offensive skill. Or at the very least, a selfish support skill that will help the Necromancer stay alive. Just not an altruistic trait. We don't need 2 altruistic traits in the same tier. And I think I covered everything. Yeah, I think that was about everything I was going to cover for this. Now, in the future, we may get a support elite that may bring blood magic in. In fact, if we get a support elite, we will probably see blood magic getting used, even with its weaknesses. But as far as I know, support elites are not on the table. Obviously, they haven't revealed the next expansion, which is, well, they're revealing the expansion tomorrow, so I guess we'll find out. But I'm not, according to what's been leaked, there's no real expectations for a support spec. It may have some support capabilities that might be exciting to play with. We'll see. I'm kind of open-minded about what we'll get for that. But without some sort of additional support trait line, Blood Magic, as it stands, is not going to work as a support trait line, and it's not going to work as an offensive trait line for how it works. Now, if Blood Bond ever gets fixed, it will probably work as an offensive trait line. In fact, if Blood Bond ever gets made usable for Power Necro, you will probably that very day see a Spite, Blood Magic, Reaper power setup. And it could very well become meta, particularly for tournaments. Granted, Necro's kind of been falling out of the tournaments. It's kind of fallen out of favor among the top EU teams. NA teams still use it. Necromancer's always been really strong on NA. I'm a little leery about Necromancer falling out of the tournament meta, but simply because if we fall out of that, we've got no real niche we can call our own other than World v World, since we're not a good solo queue class. But whatever, that's just me fear-mongering. And that's another discussion entirely and beyond the purview of this video. So I'm going to just stop it here, and that's just all I wanted to say.